Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you. It does work. If you are here for the Distinguished Speakers Series in Sustainability featuring Katy Leakey, you are in the right place. If you're here for Sustainability 2, you are also in the right place. So we are kicking off this quarter with a guest speaker. After the break, we'll talk a little bit about the course. But it is a real pleasure for me to be able to introduce our guest. There are only a couple of families in the world who are identified with sustainability, entire families who have played a major role, who everybody on the planet virtually is aware of. The Cousteau family, for the work they did, exploring the oceans, helping us understand what was happening to the oceans, developing technologies to allow us to see deep into the oceans. The Leakey family, for their work across a range of domains, throughout the 20th century, as they brought to the world evidence of hominids that emerged probably first in East Africa some 2 million years ago, and after showcasing that, shared with the world their incredible love for the culture, the land, the biodiversity of the region, and played a major force stimulating conservation activity in Kenya, Tanzania, and across Africa. Almost everybody, I imagine, has heard of Louis Leakey and his wife Mary, who first discovered these ancient fossils, these ancient skeletal remains, and were able to definitively argue that humans had lived continuously, some version of our species had lived continuously in that area for about 2 million years. They also played a major role in establishing conservation and in helping a continent that underwent some dramatic changes that left the colonial era in the 60s and emerged in the world as a group of some 50-odd countries, independent countries. His sons, including Richard Leakey, almost every undergraduate and graduate student at some point in their career has probably read, or should have read, Origins of Humankind. It's one of those books that is extremely compelling, and it's a great testimony to the fact that a person can devote their lives to rigorous research and also have a major impact on the real world. Richard Leakey was the director of the Kenyan Wildlife Service and one of the first people to start mobilizing communities around conservation and around protecting endangered species from poaching and so on. His brother Philip Leakey, also born in Kenya, was and remains the only white person to have been elected to the Kenyan Parliament and served at a cabinet level in a number of ministries, including foreign affairs and the environment. And today we have a member of the Leakey family here to start off this quarter. Katy Leakey was actually born here in Orange County, and she and her husband Philip founded the Leakey Collection. And I'm not going to preempt what she has to say, but I want to just provide a little bit of context. The Maasai people faced a moment of incredible crisis when global forces of environmental change undermined traditional livelihoods and pushed these communities towards really disastrous health and financial situations. And Philip and Katy tried to develop a model that was culturally sensitive, that was appropriate, over which they would have ownership, which they could co-design, that would nonetheless connect them to the global economy. So a model of an entrepreneurial model that would protect their way of life and connect them to the global economy. And it has been truly a dramatic success, affecting the lives of thousands and thousands of people who are able to retain those elements of their tradition that they choose to retain and interact with the rest of the world and its economy on terms that are fair, terms that are sustainable, terms over which they have control. So to be able to welcome Katy Leakey to talk about her experiences, what she and her husband have been doing in Kenya over the past 15 years is a tremendous honor. And it's important for all of us because we hear so much about the challenges that we're facing. We all know how difficult they are. We live in the 4th year of a major drought in California. We know that these challenges are real, and we need to hear stories of people who have tackled them and succeeded in tackling them and made real lives better in real and tangible ways and created models that other people can emulate. We're going to start off with a short video, but before we play that, I want you to all join me in welcoming Katy Leakey.
To the Maasai of East Africa, livestock is their wealth. In 2001, most of Kenya was hit hard by a prolonged drought, and the Maasai suffered more than most, with some communities losing as much as 3/4 of their cattle. In times of drought, the men and boys go ever farther afield to find pasture and water. It was a time of severe hardship for the children and women left behind in the manyatas, or temporary settlements. Their hardships moved Philip Leakey and his wife Katy to come up with an alternative source of income. They did it by turning the Maasai women into jewelers for the export market. Philip and Katy Leakey came up with the idea of remote workstations that allow the Maasai to work close to their manyatas. Philip is a former Kenyan MP and a son of Louis Leakey, who, with his wife Mary, made the Leakey name famous throughout the world for their discovery of remains and even footprints of our prehistoric ancestors in Kenya's Rift Valley. The name is now carried by their line of African-made jewellery, the Leakey Collection. They designed a range of jewellery and a production process using self-contained jewellery-making kits, each of which comes with all the materials needed to assemble 10 pieces of jewellery.
When we come out to a work site, we bring the kits from the workshop, and the kits all come in bags of 10 pieces of jewelry, 10 strands each kit. And the women come up and check out a kit. And once they check out their kit, they then come over here and sit on the ground, because this is where they're most comfortable for beading. They like to spread all the beads out into their lap rather than have it set in trays. So they sit on the ground, and in their lap they'll put the different piles of the different colors of beads, the grass and glass, and then they have checked out the elastic, which comes in the bag as well, and a needle. And they string each strand until they've finished with all 10 strands. And when they're through with the strands, what they do is they come back over here for quality control.
This innovative way of working allows the women to come and go as they please and earn as much or as little as time allows. The ultimate in flexi time.
So we try to design a system that doesn't interrupt the lifestyles of the Maasai people. We try to make our business fit their lifestyle rather than change their lifestyle to fit our business. And as a result, we find some women now able to string 100 strands in a day. When we started, they were stringing 8 or 9, and that was a stretch for them.
Although the working practices have been adapted to support the traditional lifestyle of the Maasai, the jewellery itself is far from traditional. The materials used and the designs have been specially chosen with the overseas market in mind. Though the Maasai are well known for their coloured bead jewellery, the main material for the Leakey collection is the chopped and dyed stems of an abundant grass, which until now the Maasai did not use. For up to 1,400 Maasai people here on the edge of the Rift Valley, the jewellery provides an average of $100 a month per person. It's becoming a reliable and drought-resistant source of income.
What we've done is tried to create a model that can be used not only here in the Maasai land by Maasai, but anywhere in the world. So our big goal is to build a business school, an educational center here in Maasai land, and that would allow them the opportunity to come in and get specific training in sustainable harvesting of raw materials, of local materials, in how to do the handicraft business or any other business, whether it happens to be in agriculture or something else that's sustainable and ecologically friendly, and then how to take that to market.
Thank you very much for coming. I would like to thank the Blum Center for putting together all the work that they're doing on tackling the big problems, poverty in the world. I would like to thank UCI and also Dr. Richard Matthews for making this possible for me to come and speak to you tonight. So thank you, and welcome back from spring break. Did everybody have a good time? Yes. You look a bit subdued, but at least you're here. Hair combed, clothes are straight, this is good. What I'd like to do is talk to you about how fair trade fits into the alleviation of poverty and to sustaining the environment and to also working in stopping conflict, because it does all of those. But the first thing I need to do is I need to give you a brief definition of what fair trade is, because I find when I talk to people, there's a lot of confusion about it. They don't really get what it is. The fair trade model is a business model. So don't confuse it with a nonprofit. It is not a nonprofit, it's a business model. And first of all, in a very simple nutshell, fair trade is business using fair practices, environmentally sound techniques for a sustainable future. It's that simple. That's really what it is. Now, you can get very deeply involved in many of the different aspects of it and how that translates into communities. But instead of doing that, what I decided to do is to really bring it home to everybody. Is I want to tell you a series of stories about life here, life there, what we did, how we came to be, and the transformation that we saw. So it's really a series of stories that when strung together, I hope is going to inspire you, all of you, to see the wonderful transformations that can take place when you get involved in something like this, or even in other aspects. As the documentary showed, when Philip and I first started Fair Trade, we didn't know what it was called. We weren't familiar with it. We just saw a need. We had as many as 100 families coming to us, coming to our house. We lived in the bush among them, and they were desperate. There was a terrible drought. It had been ongoing for 4 years, and the men had to take the cattle outside of Kenya, and they left the women and children behind, not because they were cruel, but that was a necessity. So the women had no way of feeding the families and putting the kids in school, so we took on that burden financially. Well, that's not sustainable for anybody. After about 100 families, we had to come up with something else. And Philip happened to have a background in botanicals, and he also had a background in starting businesses and industries. He knew a lot about that, and he had played around with this particular type of grass. So he said, well, maybe we can make beads out of this, and we can start a beading project. So that's what we did. It took a little bit more than that, longer than that, but I'm going to shorten the time frame for you so that it just sticks with the poignant stories. No one knew whether grass beaded jewelry would sell. And Philip at the time was giving talks here in this country, and we would sell them in the back of the room. I felt like this little, watch salesman in the back of the room with my trench coat, trying to sell jewelry. We'd sell them, and then I'd get the glass beads and elastic and take them back over there and start up again. It began to take on traction, and more people were coming to the house wanting work. So then we discovered trade shows. Big jump, big jump. We all of a sudden, we had 350 orders, we had stores across America. It was just crazy. So we quickly ramped up, and we set up a production that could be mobile, could span out to different areas. All of this designing it with the women. And one of the first things that happened to us is there was a work site quite a bit away, and we were opening up that we just set up that month, and it was the first payday of the month at this particular work site that was far away from where we were. And so our manager takes this big box full of envelopes with all this money in it, and he gets on his little motorbike and he putters out there, and he doesn't come back until midnight. And we're thinking, my gosh, what happened? Something happened to him. So he finally staggers back in, and he said, we couldn't pay the women. And I said, what happened? And he said, well, you know how they gave a name every day when they came to the work site? And we wrote it down, very carefully, and we had these long sheets. And we kept track of how much they earned. He said, but when we got there to the work site, they didn't collect the envelopes. There were only about 10 out of 150 women that collected envelopes, and everybody's really upset with us. They're saying we're stealing from them and doing all these horrible things. And so we said, well, what's the deal? So we finally found out that in their culture, their name is a description of who they are. It takes into account 850 years of history of coming down from the north. It takes into account their clan, and it takes into account their position within the clan. And just as if we had a vase of flowers here and you all painted it, and we all knew what the still life was of, every one of your paintings would be completely different. And that's what happened with the names every day. So we came up with book numbers. And we got little books. And from that point, we didn't have that confusion again. The next little issue, they're going to stop these in a minute, yeah, and just hold it. The next little issue that came up early on was some of these outlying areas where our work sites were. We were now beginning to move out 50 miles into the rift, 75 miles into the rift. We had 6, 7 work sites and growing. The next thing that happened was, I happened to be at this one, again, first payday at a work site, and they bring out the box of envelopes, and they're all stacked with stacks of 1,000-shilling notes. And the 1,000 shillings is a value of about $13 US. So they were, you know, a pad of these 1,000-shilling notes. And the women started tearing up the notes. And we're going, no, no, what are you doing? Stop, stop, stop. And they didn't know what a 1,000-shilling note was. They had never seen their own currency. Because they'd never earned enough money to ever see their own currency. They hadn't earned money before. The only thing they'd ever seen are little coins. So that was a revelation to us about how necessary this work was. And the other thing I want to say about fair trade, it's never imposed upon people from top down. It's always something that begins because somebody needs it. There's some place that needs work and needs financial opportunity. With any fair trade company, it doesn't matter where they are. So things are moving along, and we're working out the nuts and bolts of this and making everything happen, and it's going, it's flowing. We're now expanding out. We're about 100 miles in the rift, and the drought ends, and the men come back. And when the men come back, we get a new issue that we hadn't even thought about. The men didn't want the women to work. And the reason they didn't want the women to work is not because they're, you know, horrible people. It's because in their culture, they're proud pastoralists. And as a proud pastoralist, you don't work in a traditional work setting. If you do, you're considered a failure. So who would want to work themselves, and who would want their wives to work? Nobody. That wasn't going to fly. But they did see that there was a need, an economic need. A lot of the cattle had died. They had no way of restocking their herds. So they were fine at first, after a while of the women working, but they wanted to be paid, not the women. So we said no. The women have been getting the money while you've been away, and the women are going to keep getting the money. Well, it's not me. So this problem began to escalate, and it became not pretty. Some women were getting beaten. It was causing interfamily problems. We would come out from our little rondable that we lived in and find these chits, which are the little paper receipts that their women are given every single day, torn up into the bush. And we were talking to the women about, why are you doing that? And they'd say, because when I come home, my husband grabs the chits from me and demands the money. But what are you doing with the money? I'm hiding it under the rocks so that he doesn't know how much I earn. So the women's first solution was, don't give us chits because it's too dangerous for us. We don't want that. We didn't like that. We said, well, we don't agree with that because we don't want you lying to your husbands. So we have to come up with a better solution. So work site by work site, we would go to that area, talk to the community leaders, talk to the men, and it just wasn't really going anywhere. So when it got really tough on the women, we would just close the work site. And we would go open it up someplace else, and these poor women would walk for an hour, hour and a half to another work site and go and work there because the money was so necessary for their survival. So finally one day, Philip and I are driving down the old bumpy dirt track to our house, and out in front of us are these Moran, about 20, 25 of them. And Moran are warriors. They're the young 20 to early 30-year-old warriors of the Maasai culture. They're not married. Their whole job is to go out and protect the region. So they go out with spears, clubs, and what's called the ruga. These guys are seriously armed to the teeth. And we're driving down the track, and we see these guys out there. We stop the truck, and oh man, what now? And they say, we want you to open up this work site. And we said, well, we've closed it twice. You're heckling the women, you're hassling them, you're beating them. No, we're not going to do it. Went back and forth several times, and finally it became abundantly clear that this situation was not going to be resolved. And we didn't particularly like being at spear point out in the bush. So finally Philip had a brainwave, and he said, how about I make you a deal? If you, Moran, walk the width of the Rift Valley, which at our place was 45 kilometers, and you walk north 50 kilometers and south 50 kilometers to cover a 100-kilometer area, 45 kilometers wide, and you come back and you talk to all the men, all the leaders, all the Moran, everybody, and you get them to agree never ever to hassle another woman again if she wants to work. And you come back and you tell me you've done that they've all agreed, and we'll open up the work site. So they talked about it under an acacia tree, and they came back and they said, okay, we'll do it. And they took off, and we're driving back to the house going, this is never going to happen. They're never going to come back. That's just crazy. Oh well, so we carry on our merry way. 10 days later, that same group of men came to our house, and they said, we've done it. And they came with also a few elders as well. And we were dumbfounded. And we asked them, why? Why did you suddenly change your mind? What's happening? And they said, because we realize that not only are the women spending money on the right things, first of all, we thought they were going to leave us, and they didn't. And then we were afraid that they were going to pamper themselves, and they didn't. They spent the money on putting kids in school, buying food, taking care of medical needs, and we get to keep the cattle. Ha! So they realized that they could keep their capital investment, so the whole family would flourish. So that was the real change that transformed the work that we do and transformed the women's lives. It was absolutely incredible, and they have not, to this day. We've been doing this for 15 years. That was about year 2 when that took place, and we haven't had a problem since. So things are moving along. It's developing. We're getting a lot of interest from other communities, and another beautiful story happened. A woman came to us. She lived a long way from where we were working, a very long way. And she paid her own transport by bus and came all the way to us and pleaded with us to please open up a work site where she lived. So the next week we drove out there, packed everything up, went out and looked at it, met with a few elders and everything else. And we said, well, okay, how many people need work? And a couple hundred. We said, okay, we'll be back in 1 week's time to talk to the whole community to make sure everybody's on board with this. So we did. A week later we come back, and there were about 200, 250 women all wanting work, and all the community elders were there. Everybody was there. So we were there all day long, talking about what we do, how we do it, how the money's transacted. Women can come and go as they please, all of that. And I talked to the women specifically, privately, about any kind of issues that they might have or be concerned about. So everything is dealt with by the end of the day. And then we go home and we wait to see if they want to invite us. So it didn't take long. Within 24 hours, we got a message. Someone came back and said, yes, bring it in. We all want it. So next week, we go there and we start it up. And the first thing you do is you have to train everyone. So we just pay everybody a flat fee for coming for the day, and we train everybody. And then our model of fair trade is setting up entrepreneurship is what we do. So instead of just providing a job, we provide a situation where a woman can come and go, earn as much as she wants. We set her up as her own business. In the early days, that was very simple to do. Now we augment that with many other things, which I'll tell you about later. So during this training session, this woman kept coming up and taking special note and talking to us and sort of. So finally, we turned to her about midweek and we said, "What is your interest here? You're obviously deeply involved in something that's a lot more than we are getting. So what is happening here?" And she said, "Well, I have a very, very tiny dukkha that I rent. And a dukkha is a store. And most dukkas in the bush consist of maize meal and the very basics that people need to eat and feed themselves. And some fuel maybe, but usually food." She said, "I rent this small dukkha and I've been here for years. I'm not from the area, but the people who live here are in arrears by 3 years, 2 or 3 years. They haven't paid their bills and I can't afford to do it anymore. I really need them to pay their bills. So I was thinking if there was work here and they earn money, then they could pay their bills." And I thought, this is a woman I want to support. What a businesswoman, good thinking. And we were thrilled, we just thought she was amazing. So the wonderful end to this story, or beginning, depending on your perspective, is that her name was Charity, was that the work operation succeeded. Everybody, or most of the people, wanted to become beaters. They did. We set it up. And within 3 months, every one of those families had paid off their debt to charity. A 3-year debt paid in 3 months. This is why fair trade needs to be in the dialogue with ending poverty. Within 6 months, Charity had saved enough money herself, because she wanted in on the action, had saved enough money herself to buy a small square of land in the middle of that town and build a dukkha for herself that she owned in 6 months. It's absolutely incredible. When you see this happening on the ground, you would go out and buy scarves and bags and everything, fair trade. It is just mind-blowing to see what people do with a little bit of economic opportunity. Well, while this is going on, word is spreading. And we're getting some elders coming from across the valley, coming to our house and talking to us, saying, "We really want you to come over to where we are." It's a long way. And it was one of the most remote parts of East Africa. Philip happened to know the area because he was working there when he was young, but he hadn't been there in 30 years or something. And he said, "I think there was a road in there once, so maybe we can get there." Because everybody's walking around. This is all on foot. Nobody's driving around in big Land Rovers. They're all walking. So, and it takes them days to get to us and get back again. So we get in our car, our little beat up old truck, and we drive across, and we get to the bottom of this 2,000 foot escarpment, and we look straight up. And I'm going, "Really? Are we gonna get up there?" And he says, "Yeah, we can get up there." Well, it took weeks of going and getting a little bit further each time. The supposed road that was there, I could sort of faintly make out that there might have been a road there once, maybe. But the trees looked pretty big and the boulders were huge, and I couldn't figure out how that had ever been a road once, but I did see some little signs of it here and there. So we finally work our way up and we pitch tents, and we do this for, 6 or 7 months, meeting with the community, and this community was destitute. I mean destitute. There was no road in except for the one that we were making. Many of the people were barefoot. Most of the children had big distended stomachs. Most of the people were very ill. There was no work, there was no opportunity, there was no food. I mean, they had cattle, it was, that kind of thing, but as far as being able to grow, they didn't farm. It was very subsistence life. And it was really shocking to us. So we said, well, the other side is doing pretty well. Looks like, it's sustainable and it's got legs and going, so let's go ahead and come over to this side. Well, that was a lot easier said than done. The first thing we had to do was actually build a proper road. And the way you build a road when you have nothing but your hands and a few pangas, which is like a machete, and maybe an iron crowbar, is when you come to a big boulder, and I'm not joking, this big, you cut a lot of trees and you build a fire on top of it. And you burn that for about 3 days, depending on the size of the boulder. And then you kick the fire away real quick and you throw cold water on it. And you hope for a crack, that you can get your crowbar in there. And you repeat that process over and over and over again until you crack the boulder into smaller and smaller pieces. And you pull it out. It took us 18 months to build a road that was about 1.5 miles long, but went up a vertical face of 2,000 feet. So looking down from the bird's eye, it was zigzag, zigzag. And a few of my family members are here who've actually been on that road, can testify. In fact, one family member, not anybody real close, but an extended family member actually has to take a Valium to be able to come up the road because she's so terrified. It was quite an ordeal getting in there. So we build a road and we move into this place. And we slowly start setting up operations. Obviously, the very first thing before we even finished the road was to get a work site in there so that we can start getting some work. Now, by this time, we didn't have the issues with the men. Everybody knew all that and things were moving along. So we didn't have those particular cultural issues. But what we found was so many people were so ill that we couldn't really help the community very much with the work sites until we got people well enough that A, they could work, and B, just get the community functioning. So one of the things we did is we started a nonprofit, and I want to talk to you towards the end of my storytelling about how the two can fit together and dovetail. And the reason we started a nonprofit is because we started taking proceeds from the sale of our jewelry and dedicating that to an initiative I started called the Women's Health Initiative. And it was small, it was trickles of money coming in, but it was enough. And this Women's Health Initiative, what I do is I determined that by talking to the women that they had already had some kind of midwife lattice work that reached out into the community. So and I met with the midwives and talked to them about the issues. At this particular point in time, we had, on average, a woman a month dying of childbirth-related issues that we would have to carry out in our car. There was no other way to do it. We had to get them help, but we were having a woman a month die. So we were trying to find out why the midwives were having so much trouble and what was going on. So with the small proceeds that we were getting and this Women's Health Initiative, the way I used the money was to bring in doctors from Nairobi and also worked with a nonprofit here in this country to pay for her doctor to, on her trip to Malawi, to swing by Kenya and come and train our midwives. And so she did, and it was so successful. Just from the first training, the women were ecstatic, and I think one of the slides that flipped through was one of the training sessions. The women were ecstatic, the midwives were ecstatic to have this knowledge. They were so hungry for it. So we continued the program, and each time we ran one of these training sessions, it was incredible. The life it gave to the community, how excited everybody was. The women felt like they had hope, that they weren't going to die, that things were going to be okay. But what we found was mind-blowing. I mean, mind-blowing. We found that culturally, they had a belief, and this is one of the big root causes, that if a woman ate too much, it made the baby big, and if the baby was too big, she would bleed to death in childbirth. So they stopped eating at 6 months and drank only water. they became desperately anemic and very, very ill. The baby's gonna go on taking the nutrients from the mother's bones, from her muscle tissue, from her body. So the women were so ill by the time they came to deliver that sometimes they didn't make it. So we thought, okay, now we need to get involved in the cultural aspect of this. And that was challenging. And if anyone wants to delve into it further, we can talk about it in the question and answer period. But we realized that there was so much going on in this community that was contributing to the poor health that we really needed to listen. We really needed to get involved, and not listen like you can solve that problem, but listen like, how did this come to be? Why stop eating at 6 months? And as it turned out, as we went through more and more courses, and I expanded this up another 100 miles up valley, and was working with 2 other groups up valley, I found that in some places, they were actually stopping eating at 4 months. I mean, it was crazy. So in listening and getting involved in the community, we came up with the fact that there were about 2 areas, that if you address 2 areas, you could cure, and I mean cure, almost 90% of the illnesses in these communities. And we're talking about 1,700 people. And that doesn't include the children and the women. I'm just talking about the registration of people registered there. We're talking about 4 or 5 times that many in this area where we were working, if you add the children onto that. And what they came down to, it came down to diet and hygiene. It was that simple. Diet and hygiene. So we started another program. Some of our jewelry, by the way, which I'm not here to plug that, but if you ever go on the website, some of the jewelry that we sell, the strands, some of the proceeds of that go to this Women's Health Initiative. And in particular, the Healthy Garden Project, which reaches out into the community, both through our Women's Health Group, Health Initiative, and our healthcare workers, but also through the school, through the educational system. So we have hired a teacher, and all she does is teach our courses in the school about diet, nutrition, the body, how it works, that sort of thing. And it's just course after course after course. It gets more and more involved. So we hit it from the children taking the information home to the families, as well as dealing with the women on the ground. One of the other problems that we saw in the community was that not a lot of kids were getting in school. That was also a big problem, much bigger problem than where we were before. And we were trying to figure out what that was all about. And it turned out that they don't have enough money to educate all their kids. So they educate the boys, they don't educate the girls, and they only educate 1 boy per household. Now, the Maasai is a polygamist culture. Any man can have 1 to 3 wives. The women are fine with that, by the way. That's not the issue for them at all. Their co-wives are very helpful in the rearing of the children and the family and the upbringing, and they become like sisters together. So in listening to them and trying to identify what the problem was, it was economic, but it was also cultural, because they figured that only the boys really had a chance to do anything with the education, that the girl wouldn't have a chance because she gets married off when she's 13. So we're looking at that, we're thinking, okay, we're hands off on the culture, we don't really want to get involved in that, but it was an issue. And women didn't like the fact their daughters weren't getting an education. The daughters didn't like the fact they weren't getting an education. So again, they come to us and we begin to get involved in how do you unravel something that's as complex as that? How do you work with a group, with a community that has such a large nut to crack as far as their deep beliefs and their religion? Well, you do it by listening. You do it by finding out why came that way, became that way, and then you work with them, you co-design with them the solution. And that's what we did. And what we did is we started a line of jewelry called Beads for Learning. Proceeds from that go to paying teachers' salaries. So the first thing we did is we cut the student-teacher ratio from 80-1 down to 40-1. So the kids who are in school are getting a better education. And then those extra teachers are able to have a more hands-on, not only with the students, but with their families. So we start sort of a counseling outreach to go out among the families. And we do it, our manager does it, the people who work with us do it, the Women's Health Initiative does it, the people involved in the school do it. And slowly, gradually, over time, we get more and more girls in school. And so luckily now we've started another program that is called Graduate Our Girls, so that the girls can now go on to higher education. Getting back to the economics in the community, one of the things that was a challenge for us, as I told you, in the early days, it was all cash. Well, we're 50 miles wide and 100 miles north and south, and we've got 13 to 15 work sites going, and there's a lot of cash traveling around that valley. And it was tricky at times. We would have to hide the cash in the hubcaps of our truck. Our manager would put on disguises when he went into town to get the cash. There were more nights than I can count where Philip and I literally we always parked our truck so that it could go down the hill with the lights off, and we had our rifles in the truck, and we would have to get in the truck with it loaded full of cash and push the car gently out so it didn't make a noise, and go out into the rift, start it down below, and go sleep under a tree at night so that we could deliver cash the next day to the work sites. But luckily, what happened is M-Pesa came in. Have any of you heard of M-Pesa? No one? Really? Okay. M-Pesa is, I'm surprised, M-Pesa is a stroke of genius that started in Kenya, and it is where people pay each other through their cell phones. So you take your 5,000 shillings and you go to an M-Pesa kiosk and you give them 5,000 shillings, and they load it onto your phone, so you have electronic money. It revolutionized life in Kenya. In 1 year after M-Pesa started, it raised the GDP 3%. That's huge. It was incredible. So we're all excited. We're thinking, oh my gosh, we got to get these cell phones out to these women, and we got to get them SIM cards and all of that. So we talked to the women about it, and they're thrilled. They're excited because no one likes to be worried about having, robberies and things like that, which were happening. So we started distributing these cell phones out into the community, and we were buying them by the box, 40 at a time, and giving the women cell phones, getting them SIM cards. And I tell you, it did not take 2 days before these women were experts. I cannot work a VCR remote. And these women are out there conducting business, buying things from Nairobi and sending it down on the matatu and doing all kinds of stuff. It was incredible, amazing. And we were so excited about it. So now it's this community has gone from barefoot and ill, and I mean seriously, seriously ill, and destitute, to the women working off cell phones. The next thing that happens is we talk a bank into coming and starting a small bank accounts. So we went from the cell phones to the women then getting bank accounts. To do that, they had to have a national ID. None of them had ever had a national ID before. So now they get a national ID, they get a bank account, and they're now using their cell phone, and they're transferring money from their bank account to their savings account, to Janet, to Susan, to whoever, and they're doing all this transaction. And how long did this take? 4.5 years. The first place we were, how long did it take to go from the women not being allowed to work to them starting their own micro lending schemes, their own investment groups? 4 years. This is why fair trade has got to become an integral part of the conversations about ending poverty. It stops domestic violence. It gives people a platform that they can climb out of their economic struggle. It does change relationships. Let me talk to you about that. The women who work now, the young women especially who work now, they're the ones that the young men want to marry. And it's not, we sort of chuckle that, yeah, because I know they got the money. But it's not that so much. It really isn't. They really want to marry them because they know their family will have a better chance. They don't want to just sit back on their laurels and let her support the place. That's not the way their society works. They really know, it's been proven to them, that with income from their wife's work, their whole family flourishes. More of their kids are going to get an education. If somebody needs an operation, they can probably have it. If they need to go to the hospital, they can pay the bill so they can go. So it's changed their lives dramatically. What's happened as a result of that is that in this last area that I'm telling you about, is not only did the women gain pride and feel good about themselves, but the men also took pride in the women. They took pride in what they were doing. They were truly proud of their wives and their sisters. And they now have a voice. The women have a voice in the politics of the area. And the men seek their counsel. The men now don't like to make too many decisions without getting the women on board. They'll slide a few through that they can get. But basically, overall, they include the women in the political discussion, which is incredible. And again, that portion of it that we've just seen recently is just in 5 years. So when you think of that transformation, and I don't know how long it would take an NGO to do that or anything else to do that, but I guarantee you nothing would do it as fast, as thorough, as self-fulfilling, self-generating, and sustainable as fair trade. So that's why it's so important. We're coming up to 8 o'clock. I would like to say one more thing before I close, and then we'll open up for questions. We're filled with a room of people, young people, who are gaining great knowledge. You have a future in front of you that hopefully you're excited about. Been a lot of dire things in the news and all sorts of things going on to make you feel maybe less hopeful. And what I want to say to you is there is a wide open world out there that is absolutely percolating with new ideas, new concepts, and new opportunities, and new ways that you can get involved. Right now, you're working really, really hard on your education, which you need to do. And you need to gain that knowledge, because that knowledge are, like the old saying, it's arrows in your quiver. And you need that. But what's more important, once you get out, is you need to listen. You need to get involved, you need to act, you need to do, you need to manifest, you need to create. Because when you do that, and have all those wonderful adventures of doing it and failing and making mistakes and getting up and doing it over again, when you do that, when you actually put it to use and try and create something with it, you're gonna gain the most important thing of all, and the thing that will serve you the rest of your lives. And the thing that will really, truly make a difference in this world. And that's understanding. Because you can't solve any problem, you can't create anything if you don't understand the problem from the ground up. What's happening? How did we get here? And you can't create anything if you don't have a clear understanding of what you want to create. So understanding is the key. And you're all about to embark on that wonderful time in your life when you can get out there and you can try and you can experiment and you can go from company to company or enterprise to enterprise. Take advantage of it. Do it. Go. Learn. There's a wonderful, wonderful, wonderful website. If you haven't heard of it, you must go to it. Biomimicry. And Dr. Matthew teaches a course in biomimicry. Sign up for it. Take it. It is the most fascinating, inspirational field of study that I can think of today. And biomimicry is where all fields, and I mean everything from art, design, from construction to building to auto design to water treatment to food processing, you name it, everything, health, even political issues, can all be solved by looking at nature, by looking how nature solved these problems. It is riveting, I promise you. Go to this website, and if you feel it all down or a little bit bummed out, you're not quite sure where to go, what to do, check out that website, look at it, because it will fill you with wonder that is out there for all of us in this world to learn from. So get out there and do it, and make it happen. Thank you very much. Any questions? I know people like to leave at 8:30 or a little before, so I promise I won't go over, because we all have to find our way back to our cars. Those of us who are students here, that's a major challenge. So does anyone have any questions at all?
So the Maasai, they have lived there for several hundred years, right? So can you explain what caused the problems with the diet and the hygiene? Is that a recent problem, or has that been ongoing, or is that triggered by climate change or other causes?
The question is, since the culture has been around so long in that area, what triggered in that particular area the lack of health? I think it was probably a combination of environment changing and sort of cultural shifts changing. The Maasai are no longer nomadic. They're pastoralists, but they're not nomadic. Their houses stay stationary. They don't pick them up and move anymore. And when a society makes that transition from nomadic to hunting, finding your food all over the place, to being in a stationary spot, you better be able to produce your food source. So that puts pressure on a group to have to solve those problems. They had a lot of difficulty in solving that culturally, again, because they didn't believe in work in the sense of what I said before, that it was a downgrade. They didn't farm really much. I mean, a few families did, and they still don't really. In fact, now one of the businesses that the women start, interestingly enough, are farms. But they don't do it themselves. They hire the Sanjo from Tanzania because the farming is beneath them. So they actually make enough money now that they hire the guys across the border and have them haul them up and put them to work in the fields. But I think it was a combination of environmental and the cultural change that was just happening naturally through the growth of the country. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
In tandem with teaching ideas about entrepreneurial, ship and business, is there anything or any efforts that are going on in teaching them about sustainability, environment, and things of that nature?
The question for those of you who didn't hear it is, in teaching them about business and that sort of thing, is there any additional training that goes on in teaching them about the environment and sustainability? That is the most difficult problem that we've had. In our particular area, I will give you our biggest issue, overgrazing by the cattle. So that's caused and is continuing to cause a huge problem. No, we have not made success. We have been trying, we're not giving up. One of the things that we set up, we did start a nonprofit, as I told you. We took in some money to work with, we haven't bought yet, but we're going to buy a dairy high yield cow to come in. It's very low grazing, low impact grazing. We've grown the Napier grass, which the cattle love. Big, huge grass, easy to grow, grows like a weed. It's fantastic. We've been growing that ever since we got up there, and we've been cutting it and giving it to them for free, and saying, please take it, please take cuttings and plant it, and no one will. We even use it to keep cattle alive that get hurt. Fun stories about that. But it won't stick for some reason. And I think we're still trying to get to the bottom of it. It's been years of trying to get to the bottom of it, but I think it has a lot to do with the men and their, how do I say it? Their self-respect, and what else are they going to do? This is their knowledge. This is what they have done for generations and generations. It's what separates them from everybody else on the planet. In their belief structure, they literally are in charge and own every cow on the planet. Truly, they believe that in their culture. That's what they believe. So, I mean, obviously they know that's not true. They're not stupid, but that's how it has come down for the years. So it's ingrained in them on a cellular level that we can't get rid of all the cows. And there have even been projects in Kenya, which is fascinating. We happen to know some people who did this project, where they sent Maasai herdsmen to Texas. And they thought, well, if we work with the Texans, we can come up with some really good techniques and all that kind of stuff. And all they came back with is, have you ever talked to a Texan about getting rid of a cow? It's all about how big your hat is, son. So they all came back gratified with the fact and the knowledge that no, big does matter. And you need to have a lot of cattle, and yeah, we agree with you guys, and don't give it up. And it's like, that is not what we wanted to get out of this. And it's funny because a lot of these Maasai have had great education. Some of them have been educated here in this country and in England, college degrees, master's degrees, and they get it. But to get them to make the change, to actually work with elders in their community and really make that change, is just been one of the most difficult things. So we haven't had a lot of success on that. Now, with the grass, we did have some moderate success. This grass happened to only grow around the wetlands, and they used to burn the wetlands to make way for small shoots of grass in between rainy seasons. And of course, when you burn the wetlands, you lose all the wildlife. So everything, the bird life, everything that was gone. So when we started this project, our goal was to also bring back the wetlands and restore the wetlands. And that happened literally in a season because we bought a concession around the wetlands. And we said, whether we pick a blade or 20 blades of grass or whatever, but don't cut the grass and we'll pay you for it, to not cut the grass. And so that's been very, very successful. Did it imprint that, oh, we like the wildlife and the birds back in? Not so much. They appreciate having the wetlands back for all the other things that they can now get from it, but there's still a huge disconnect between the resources of nature and running out of the resources of nature. Don't you find that? Yeah. It's a huge challenge. I'm not quite sure how to get that, but we're still listening and we're still learning. Is anybody else over here? Mm-hmm.
I have one question. What is the energy source for their living?
The energy source?
Yeah. Like how do they recharge their phones?
Oh, I was going to say, what energy? They don't have energy. Yes, now you're right. What we did is we bought little tiny solar panels, this big. So everybody who has a cell phone, or anyone who lives around where our workshop is, can hook it up to our power source, which is solar. We do have a generator that we have to use from time to time if we have big equipment for making components or something, and we'll run that on a limited time basis. But solar. Anybody else? Mm-hmm.
You mentioned earlier that one of the major challenges you had to face was the lack of food after like 6 months of being pregnant among the women. How did you go about combating such a seemingly long-standing condition?
We had a very inventive woman from America, Bonnie McClellan, And hats off to you, Bonnie, wherever you are. She had the most ingenious teaching techniques. What we did is well, let me start, because I personally love this story. It's pretty hard to teach someone about their body if they don't even know what blood is for, and they didn't know what blood is for. They didn't know that blood carried nutrients. They didn't understand the most basic mechanisms. They didn't know how they got pregnant. Well, they knew roughly how, but they didn't know what happened. They didn't know what happened. Let's put it that way. And a lot of really weird superstitions around it that I could keep you busy with all night. But what we had to do is when we learned that by listening and asking questions, we realized, wow, we really have to start way back. So what Bonnie and I decided to do is, well, let's start with just the blood. I mean, this is their issue. Their issue was the women bleed to death at childbirth. So let's start in learning what blood does and what it's about. So what we did is we set up 6 bottles, plastic bottles, and we put water in it, and we took some of the dye from our dye operation, red dye, and we put a little bit in the first one and then increased it all the way down until we had solid red. And what we did is we said, the blood carries nutrients. So when you eat something, you go through the whole digestion, you get the picture, you get what we're doing. And we said, and it travels in this. And if your blood looks like this, it's not going to carry very many nutrients. We had to improvise. But it made the point. It's not going to carry very many nutrients. The more healthy you are, this is the blood that's going to carry those nutrients. The only way you're going to have strong blood, hearty blood, is if you eat. And you have to eat the right food. You can't eat just any food, especially when you're pregnant. It's got to be high in iron, folic acid, all of these things which are prevalent. They grow like weeds. There are lots of local plants that would be fine. So we started at that level, and then I brought in Nova's film, The Miracle of, I think it's a Miracle of Birth, something like that. I can't remember the name of it. But it goes through, it shows pictures, it's a video of all the way through from conception to birth, and exactly how the female body changes, how the baby develops, all that kind of stuff. And you should have seen those women. They were riveted, absolutely riveted. I mean, they were speechless. They were just sitting there staring at the screen. They had never, ever seen anything like it in their lives. It was fantastic. So we realized in listening to them and understanding what the problems were key, when we got to understand, we realized how we had to adapt, what we had to work with to reach them, to get them to understand that. And then they did. They did understand it. We've had a problem this last year with spina bifida show up. We've had 7 cases in 3 months of spina bifida. And again, it's folic acid, that sort of thing. So there are some families in some areas that are not switched on to it. But what we've done with our Women's Health Initiative is I've mapped out the entire area with every single BOMA and every single home within a BOMA is a homestead, every single home within the homestead. And so we're now tracking it and able to track. So we know where we need to set the Women's Health Initiative healthcare workers, community workers, to go out and start talking to them. That's why we have our Healthy Garden program, to teach them to eat, to grow healthy food, and all of that. And we're also running the program in the school. Any other questions? Mm-hmm.
What would you say right now are the next crucial steps for the foundation to take?
A business, not a foundation.
Well, the combination of the nonprofits as well as the fair trade.
The next crucial steps for fair trade, or for us where we're working? I think on a business level, the next steps are to increase how we are marrying our nonprofit, which we've been lucky to get some wonderful donations last year that have enabled us to do a lot more than just our jewelry sales. To weave that in with the work that we're doing is number one, so that I'd like to bring more women in, get them involved in community work on a level of volunteerism, And I know that may sound crazy to people here saying, oh my gosh, they need money so bad. No, when you're on the ground and you're working in Africa and you're working in the rural areas, you need the concept of volunteerism. You need people to understand that they shouldn't always be like this before they do anything to help someone. And that's one of the problems of nonprofits. Nonprofits cause a lot of problems on a grassroots level unless they know how to work with the communities. So that's a very tricky thing. But nonprofits have a great place, which I mentioned I would bring up for us, so I'll do it now. They have a wonderful way that they can work with fair trade companies. They can support those fair trade companies through training. There's a brilliant fair trade nonprofit organization that's doing a lot of work for fair trade in South America. And they actually have, in fact, I wish she should put all this information on the internet so everybody have access to it. What they have done is, over the years, they have learned how to train people, local people on the ground, everything to do with startup all the way through working out every issue. Supply, control of inventory, management, capacity building, getting your product to market in the right price, all of that. And in those areas, if nonprofits want to get involved in grassroots, at a grassroots level, those would be extremely helpful. So I think that's the next step for the nonprofit world. They're mainly focused on, which they should be in my opinion, mainly focused on infrastructure, larger issues, health, education, road structure, that sort of thing. Not so much on a person-by-person basis. And that's why working together, dovetailing together with fair trade, which is definitely a grassroots, that's what it is. It's all grassroots. It's individual by individual, home by home, community by community. By working together, they could make a lot of good magic together. Mm-hmm.
You mentioned relationships and people telling their stories and understanding, and the mutual understanding or not. Did you notice any other emotional or from their telling the story and their being understood, how that affected their self-esteem or their confidence or any of their emotional development and growth that way?
It's a very intriguing question. Let me try and rephrase it or say it again to make sure I understand you. The question, as I heard it, was in all the discussions with the women and listening to their stories, and obviously some of these are quite emotional, has there been any sort of emotional evolution and change that has taken place? It's a very interesting question. In all honesty, I have never looked at that. I don't know, and I would say don't make assumptions. However, I will say that the women there are highly social, highly interconnected, very helpful. I mean, think about this. I once wrote an article when I was just in the first year of being there. I was so green, fresh out of California. And I was absolutely blown away by how these women work so well together and live in the same moment, the same homesteads. I mean, here you've got one man, 3 wives. Could you do that here very easily? No. I mean, some cultures aside, some people get it and have it work for them, but not across the board. And so I was fascinated by how do you do that? Where's jealousy? Why doesn't that kick in with you? What's going on an emotional level for the women? And I learned that it came down to this. If I had to put it in a nutshell, I would say it like this, and I described it this way in the article. To be a successful parent in America, you raise your child to be independent, right? To be a successful there among the Maasai, you raise your child to first look after the community, second, look after the family, and there is no concept of look after themselves. It doesn't exist. It is exactly flipped from our society. So back to your question on the emotions, I think the women are just so used to talking it out being together that I haven't noticed any emotional evolution. In fact, quite honestly, it's the other way around. They have taught me so much. Just incredible. I get counseled by 30-year-olds all the time, patting me on the shoulder, don't cry, it's okay. You know, don't be depressed. Even if you're only 10% successful, that's better than nothing. You know, they're wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Any other questions? That's right.
Has the success with the Maasai women moved outside this cultural group to other groups?
Where we're not working?
Yeah, but you have other free trade
Fair
ideas
trade.
percolated outwards.
Um,
Or do you think it's part of their polygamous existence
Oh.
makes it more likely to work inside this group?
No. Excuse me, let me say the question is has the idea of fair trade spread beyond the Maasai? Is that right? Yes. Definitely, absolutely. There are hundreds of thousands of fair trade operations all over the world. And there's,
within Africa.
yeah, there are many. Just across the valley, they're everywhere. They're popping up all over the place, which is fantastic. Absolutely fantastic. I was just at the Fair Trade Federation conference in Del Mar last week, and discussing at the conference all these issues. The biggest bottleneck we have in fair trade is not enough outlet at this end. We've got suppliers, we've got communities, we've got literally hundreds of thousands of operations all over the globe, but they need to get their products to market, and so we need the market to open up. We need work done and to get the products out in the market, whether it's online or brick and mortar, it doesn't matter. Anybody else?
Do you see the free trade business model, like I understand how it would be integrated here and everything, but do you see it as an option for alleviating poverty in the United States?
Absolutely, definitely. In fact, I've mentored several universities and communities over the years in America on exactly that. Her question was, do we see any application for fair trade here in America? And definitely, because just remember what fair trade is. Fair trade is creating job and entrepreneurial opportunity using fair practices with environmentally sound techniques for a sustainable outcome. That can be done anywhere. And the greatest part of fair trade, in fact, you know, often we happen to think, well, fair trade, these are products being shipped in from all over the world, and what about the footprint and, blah, blah, and all that kind of stuff. There are more fair trade operations that are local operations that are making products for people in their hometown than there are ones for export. And those are very, very successful. So I would just use those same models. And what the key is to those models, very simple. You go into a community. If you're from the outside, most of this starts from someone inside. But if you're from the outside and you want to get involved, then you go to some leaders in the community and you say, what are your problems? And you listen. I keep referencing that. Listen. Listen until you understand. And then when you understand, then you can go ahead and work with them and set something up and do it local. You don't want to bust things across town if you can sell it locally. Find out, make that connection between production and end user. What's a person across the street looking for? What are they going to buy? And then go back to these people and say, well, what are you going to make? And then you go back to somebody else and say, what resources do you have? That's how the whole recycle movement got started. Key is listening. I have a very funny story to tell you about that. Philip and I were out somewhere in Kenya. I don't remember where, but we were a long way from home. And we came across a community that had a big sweep of, and it will remain nameless, but it's one of the world's biggest foundations, and we would all know it. So I will leave it nameless because there are enough to choose from. That had done a big sweep through, and they were doing this big health push in the area. And they were going to train people, and the very first thing they knew they needed to do was take a census of what was happening in the area. So they came through and they trained everybody. They spent 2 or 3 days there training these people to how to fill out the forms, how to ask the people the questions, why the information was relevant, what was going to be done with the information, on and on and on. And there was this whole sweep. So we go, wow, that's fantastic. How'd it go? It didn't work. Well, why not? They didn't leave us pencils. I kid you not. They didn't leave them the pencils. So they couldn't fill out the form, so the whole thing was a complete bust. And so I was telling a friend of mine that a year ago, and I don't know if she came tonight or not, but she will chuckle if she hears me repeat the story. So I told her that story, and I said, what is it with organizations that they don't listen? I said to the girl, why didn't you tell them? She said, we did. They left the forms. We said, we don't have any pencils. We need pencils. But it just, they didn't listen. And so we now have this shorthand when we talk to each other about, don't forget the pencils. I was telling her about this story, and she happens to be involved in a lot of very high-profile negotiations. She was recently in South Sudan working on that a month ago, and sitting around with all the big players at the table. And I knew this was going on, and I knew she couldn't share much of it because it's confidential information. And I met with her, I know when I first got here, and I said, so how'd it go? And she just looked at me and she said, they forgot the pencils. Are there any more questions? Did I answer that one adequately, by the way? Yes, way up there in the back.
How independent are the Maasai now, with since you organized the whole business, or are you still kind of in charge of the day-to-day operations throughout all these workstations?
The question was, how independent are the Maasai, or are we still in charge of the work operation? Do you mind if I rephrase that a bit to get the nuances of what you're asking about? Are you asking, are they starting their own businesses and taking off with it, or would everything collapse if we leave, or
yeah,
what?
Kind of in that sense.
Kind of in that sense. In our area, it would be, where we are now, it would be a tiny bit tricky to just suddenly pull out. Because there aren't quite enough legs built yet. But I would guess that within another 3 years, we probably could leave and everything would be self-sustaining. There's just a lot of work to do there. They started a lot of their own businesses. One of the things I left out, which I did, I didn't mean to leave out, when we were on the other side of the rift, one of the beautiful things was after that story about Charity that I told you, where she was able to pay, everyone was able to pay off their debts. The women not long after that came up to me. So we're now 3 years into it, and they said to me, we want to start a women's investment group, and we've actually started on it, but we're having some trouble. So we want to talk to you about it. And we also want a little training in cash flow management. Really? Seriously? This is incredible. Just 3 years into this, and you didn't even know what a 1,000-shilling note looked like. And now you're talking about cash flow training and, microfinance. This is amazing. I said, so what's the problem with the microfinance group? And they said, well, we have found that when you get more than 13 women together, nothing gets done. And I said, well, there's your answer. Form a lot of little groups of 13. So they did. And I helped them organize it and all of that. It was really, really fun. But the other thing that was amazing to me was talking to them about the cash flow. I did get involved in that. I wrote a whole course curriculum and sat down with them under the trees, and every week we had a training in cash flow. And I was absolutely amazed at how quickly they grasp things. I'll give you one example. I got 3 minutes left to tell the story, and then you're all free to go. One of the problems that we had, this gets back to the environment, one of the problems that we had is everybody was cutting down all the acacia trees where we were, and they were burning them to make charcoal. So they were denuding the landscape, and it, as you know, that's a terrible thing to do. Well, there's no food for the goats. There's no shade, so no grass can grow anymore. So it was just turning the place into a desert. So in this class, cash flow class, I said to the women, how much money are you making on the charcoal business that you're running? And it turned out to $50 per tree that they would burn. And I said, okay, let's do the math on the tree, the value of the tree. How long does a tree produce seeds that support the goats? How many years? And they said probably about 35, maybe 40 years. I said, okay. How many goats can one tree feed? They said maybe 20, 25. I said, okay, so let's do the math. Oh wait, how much do you sell a goat for? Well, we can get between $25 and $30 value US for a goat. So I said, okay, you're burning a tree to make $50 that if you kept it for 25 years would feed 20 to 25 goats a year. And how many goats are born to each female goat a year? 2. So you're doubling your money every year. Let's do the cash, not even household cash flow. Let's just do this from a business perspective. Does it make sense to burn the trees? And they thought, no, you know, that's crazy. We'll go into the goat business instead of the charcoal business. So they did. But it was anyway, it's quite fun. And I'm sorry to go on so long, but it's been such a pleasure talking to all of you. Thank you so much.